Welcome to our first Writers Education webinar series of 2025. Today's presentation is the first of 5 planned for this year, and each Zoom session and video will mirror our Write Your Story program. For those not yet familiar, MWSA's Write Your Story seminars include presentations covering various aspects of writing, which are geared to the needs of veterans interested in learning more about the basic mechanics of putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. For several years now, we've hosted these seminars in conjunction with our annual conference. We plan to host another Write Your Story event before kicking off our annual conference this coming September in Kansas City, Missouri. In today's presentation, Jim Tritton will provide an introduction covering the basic reason why we write. Future editions of this video series will cover setting, starting your story and characters, narration and dialogue, and plot and story arc. Visit the events section of our website to see when we'll offer these Zoom sessions and who will be presenting. With that preamble out of the way, it's time to turn the mic over to today's presenter, Jim Tritton. Jim is a retired Navy carrier pilot who lives in New Mexico with his Danish author/artist wife and an ever-changing number of cats. Jim has a real passion for writing and for helping his fellow veterans get their stories onto paper and published. We're very fortunate to have Jim on our MWSA team and with us today. Over to you, Jim.
So, good afternoon from a cold but sunny New Mexico. Today's presentation is how to get started with writing, how to write your story. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I plan to talk about why you might want to write, how to get started, some examples of various genres. Then we'll do an exercise that won't take too long, and then where to get some help if you really need to, if you want to get serious about all this stuff. So let's start out with why you want to write. And I suggest starting doing that, because if you know why you're doing it, it may shape what you want to write and when you want to write it. So here's the first reason that lots of people want to write, because they're going to make lots of money. Barb, you're laughing. Barb is laughing because it is really unlikely that anybody is going to make lots and lots and lots of money. Some people do, but it's not my motivator. It could be yours, and if you want to go down that path, that's a perfectly good path to go down. Another reason to write, and one I think that is very common for the membership of military writers, is to leave a legacy for the family or the nation. A memoir piece. What did I do when I was in the military? How did I handle my spouse when my spouse came back from his time in the military and he had symptoms that were later diagnosed as PTSD. Those are memoir kind of stories, and that's very, very common in a good place to start. Keep yourself in a good frame of mind. Humor as an antidote for the news. Well, lots of people are not very happy. They haven't been happy. And so writing is one way to escape listening to the news and keep yourself in a good frame of mind. When I started out after being initially diagnosed with PTSD, that's where I turned, was to humor, because I enjoyed it. It was fun for me. And when I took my stories into the VA writing group and I would read them and they laughed, it might be the only laugh that those guys and gals would have had all week. So that's a good reason to write. Keep yourself busy. How many of you have the honey-do list? See, I get an automatic pass if I say I'm writing. Then it's like, oh, okay, I'll leave you alone. Wow, that's a really good reason to write. Get your ideas out there. I know that everybody who's listening to this has got opinions. Well, if you got opinions, does it really do anybody any good unless you get them out there to share them with people? Writing is an option for you to get your ideas and your stories out there in a way that people pay attention to what you have what your opinion is. Social interaction. It's an integral part of writing because you need to have other people look at your writing and critique it or advise you as to whether they think it might benefit from this or that. That's a social interaction, and we're social creatures. So writing and social interaction go hand in hand, and they're very healthy, especially as we age. And then one of the main reasons I write now, the main reason is to process for healing. The VA believes in that, and not just the VA, but medical practitioners who are treating people with post-traumatic stress disorder. They use a term called exposure therapy, where you write about what happened enough, or you talk about it, either or both, that it then becomes just another memory and something that is no longer causing you problems. And then finally, keep those little gray cells active, as Hercule Poirot would say. Is it an antidote for dementia? I don't know. I'm betting that it might be. I'm 79 and I'm still writing. And John, do I have dementia? I don't know. I can't tell. I don't remember anymore. Okay. So figure out why you want to write. There's no wrong answer to that. But be honest with yourself. I'm writing this for therapy. That doesn't mean you have to publish it. That means you have to write it and you have to talk about it, but it doesn't mean you need to run out there and look for a publisher. If you want to write and get it out there and have a publisher, that's fine too, but that's a different approach then. So what do you want to write about? Where do these ideas come from? Well, let me give you some idea. And there's a whole lot of answers for this. My wife, Yasmin, kept letters that she wrote home to Denmark to her mother. And her mother kept them and then returned them to Yasmin. And then Yasmin kept a journal of all of her time when she left her native country and came to the United States as a legal immigrant in 1964. That's a perfectly good source of material that you can use to then write a story, write your memoir, or go back and find some really neat things that happened to you and maybe do a short story or a chapter in a book about that particular episode. But you need the raw material, and the raw material is wonderful if you've got it in writing or in electronic form. Writing prompts. I love writing prompts. Not everybody does. I like to be able, I like the idea that I started out writing in one genre. I experimented with lots of other genres, and I enjoy going in to an improv kind of a setting, and somebody says, well, why don't you write about this subject? And I do that frequently. I just did that recently in something that I hope will appear in print reasonably soon. And it's a good way for a class to get going. And we're going to do that in a bit. We're going to have a little bit of an exercise, and I'm going to ask you based on a writing prompt that I'll give you. Responses to contest categories. I live in New Mexico, and Southwest Writers here frequently has contests, and they have a monthly challenge for the members, and they put a category up or a prompt, and they say write a story about this, so many words, and that's a good way to get started. If you're not quite sure what you want to write about something. It doesn't have to be, don't start out trying to write War and Peace. Start out by just writing one sentence and work your way from there. Ideas that just pop into your head. I get great ideas in the shower. I don't know why that is, but a lot of people talk about how they are, if they're in the shower, they go, oh yeah, now I know what it is. And of course, you always get good ideas in the middle of the night, 2:00 in the morning, in which case you go, oh, yeah. And then you go and maybe you got a piece of paper nearby and you can write it down and then try to decipher it in the morning. But an idea just pops into your head. Try to figure out a way to capture that. Write it down, or if you got a smartphone that's got a recording capability, you can just put that idea in there and say, okay, maybe I should look into this as a topic. Borrow. There is nothing illegal about, or even unethical, to borrow the idea from other people's stories. Just change the characters, the location, and the theme. I have done that with a book that I have written, an unpublished book that I have written. It is based on a very famous book written by Agatha Christie, but it's set in New Mexico. It's not set on an island like she did, and not everybody dies exactly the same way that she did it. And so, yeah, that's not illegal. But if you're getting the idea from somebody, and that gives you a skeleton which you can work with instead of a blank sheet of paper. If you start out with a skeleton, that's not too bad. Writing as therapy as a part of medical treatment. That's me. That's why I do it. Keeps those little gray cells from forming into dementia or Alzheimer's, hopefully also. Okay, how to get started. All right. This is one I like to use. Every one of you, do you have a story that you tell around the dinner table every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Hanukkah, whenever you're with a group of people that you already know, and it's just an old family tradition to go through that story one more time? Well, that's a story that's got a beginning, probably, and a middle and an end. If you can tell the story, you can write the story. Do you ever go to a reunion with your military compadres, and you tell that story about good old so-and-so who did this really dumb thing one night? Well, we probably all have those stories, and if you can tell that story, you can write that story. If it's based on reality, then you're writing nonfiction, and all your facts have to be true. If you are stuck in that it's based on reality, but it's not exactly reality, you have changed the order in which things have appeared or happened, then you're being creative with your nonfiction. And when you're making up unless you happen to have a recording device with you, you're probably going to have to make up the dialogue. You know what people said, but you don't know what the words were. You just know what it was that they more or less did. And then if the entire thing is not based on reality, then it's fiction, and it's a story that's told by a storyteller. Those are the ways to go about it. Where do you want to start with? Lots of our members start out with writing a memoir based on their military service. That should be nonfiction. If it is based on that military service, but you decide that you want to move some things around and maybe change the dates or change the location so that you're not going to incriminate the ones that you're going to talk about, that's creative nonfiction, and that's okay too. Butch Mackey did that very well in his book, Bikini Beach. All of it is based on reality, but it's a fiction book. Examples. Let's go into some examples. Can you write and capture what it was like when you were on patrol in the jungles of Vietnam or the caves of Afghanistan? You probably can get the facts more or less right. You can probably do that. Can you get the feelings in there? It's the tougher one, because guys, you're not going to want to write that you were afraid, but you probably were. So how do you do that? Well, first, what I did was I went to the VA. I was in the VA's programs for PTSD, and I learned about all those other feelings and emotions that I'm supposed to have known about. But of course, as a guy, the only two I had, that I really knew well were humor and anger. So how do you write about the other ones? Well, you're gonna have to learn about them and transpose those into your situation. And to think through, well, if I was afraid, what would that have been like? You knew you were, but you're not sure. How do you word that? Well, look it up. There's lots of places where you can get suggestions as to the kinds of emotions that you probably feel in various situations, and then you can just transpose those into your military characters in the setting that you want. If you're not the veteran, can you describe what your father or your sibling or your child felt when they were on a mission? You probably can. You can probably get it more or less, but do you think they ever really told you what really went on? My experience with talking to folks that are trying to write about what their relatives did is that most of them really don't know exactly what went on, and that's because a lot of veterans don't like to talk about it. And ask yourself, what is the purpose about writing about someone else? Are you doing that? I mean, are you trying to write about what they did, or are you trying to write about how it felt for you dealing with what they did? One place that you might find what they admitted to is in the Veterans History Project. There's interviews that are done by volunteers. They've been done for many, many years. They're all in the Library of Congress database, and you can listen to an oral history done by a veteran, and it may be the only time that that veteran ever really honestly said what it was like. And so if you're the surviving family member and you want to know what you want to know what your brother did, go see if he did an interview, either with the Veterans History Project or at some other place. Another place they may have fessed up to it. What they really did is the Together We Served social media sites. There's one for each service. I've listed the Navy there, but if you just go to Together We Served, you'll find that lots of veterans have written answers to prompts about what they did on active duty. Some of it's quite humorous because they're figuring nobody's ever going to read this stuff. And you can read it and you can sit there and come up with, oh, so that's what it was really like when they were on active duty. It wasn't all about parades and getting medals. Okay, another example of ways of things to write about. Lee Childs, you probably know that name, and you probably know his main character, Jack Reacher. He's a former U.S. military policeman, warrant officer, if I remember correctly. Lee Childs is British. He has never served in any armed forces, and he has never been in law enforcement. And he writes great books, and the books are made into movies, and he's laughing all the way to the bank. He's actually pretty good at it. Even his critics say he generally gets it right. Adventure and thrillers are a good way for people in the military to want to write because it's got high-tech, neat weapons, dangerous locations, high stakes. Those are all really good reasons to get involved with writing adventures and thrillers. But that's not the only thing that you can write. How about domestic use of the military? This is a tough one for some. Well, let's start out easy. The Army Corps of Engineers, they do a lot of work in this country, and they probably don't get a lot of credit. And so they're probably looking for people to write stories about what they have accomplished. Disaster relief. It's not just the National Guard. You can write a nice little story about how the Guard and the military was mobilized to help and had to learn to work with private volunteer organizations. I'm sure there's a lot of that going on right now in California, and before that in North Carolina. War on illegal substances. There's a topic that is probably going to never go away because we've got some legal issues. You've got you have the military is hamstrung, or their hands are tied because of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. They tried to enforce it, and you run up against the Posse Comitatus Act, which says that the military can't go in and do things domestically, but they do. Despite all of the laws, if you'll look up what happened on March the 10th of 2009, military police were sent into Alabama following a mass shooting and 11 civilian deaths. Absolutely illegal. It was done. There's a story that needs to be told. Who did that authorization, and what was the result of the military police coming off the post? And of course, here's a topic that the ongoing border security that is going to be with us in the very near future. It's there already where you have federal and state roles, but what happens if the law enforcement and National Guard can't cope? Is there a situation where the federal government would try to mobilize? I mean, that could be written as fiction. You don't have to write it as nonfiction. Okay, classroom exercise. So what we're going to do for this is I'm going to give you a second to get your pieces of paper or open up a screen that you can write with. So I'd like you to first write, not think, but write a single sentence that describes the story that you already tell to everybody and you could write about. Don't try to invent a new story. Take a story you already tell around the dining room table at the reunions, and you could write about it. You could write a story about that. Write one sentence. Next, underneath that sentence, add a single bullet saying when it occurred and where it occurred. Next, write what are the circumstances that would make somebody want to read your story? Why would somebody want to read it? And now answer, why do you want to write that story? Are you writing it to record for the family? That's a very good reason. Are you writing it for entertainment? You're going to write the story that's going to make you $1 million. Or you're writing it for therapy, just to keep the monkey brain occupied. Now, when you have got it that you think you have you got all you want out of that, raise your hand electronically in your Zoom, and I'll ask for a couple of you to give me to read what you've written. And I will look here. I got a hand. Okay, I got a hand being written, but I can't see the face. And it's a man. And who the heck is that? All I see is a hand up like this. Who is that? Go ahead. Whoever's got your hand up, your real hand. I meant electronic hands, which you don't. Okay. Go ahead. Unmute yourself and tell us what you wrote. I can't see your name. I'm sorry. And I can't hear you.
Bobby Parnell.
Oh, Bobby. Okay. Gotcha. You got in.
Yeah, thanks to you.
All right. Go ahead and tell us what you got, Bobby.
Okay. Being in Finland, taking a sauna with my girlfriend's father.
Okay.
It was 1975 in Finland. It was extremely different, and it's entertainment for my friends. Very funny.
Excellent. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. Something very simple, just to give you an idea of what it is that you want to write and knowing why you want to do it. I have written about taking a sauna in Denmark, and I wrote it for entertainment because I wrote it to make it clear that I had never been so hot and I had never been so cold. And I was experimenting with how many ways I could continue to say things like that. Who else has got something they want to share with everybody? I'm looking here. I can't see any other hands up or electronic hand. Okay, John, I see your hand. Go ahead, John. Unmute yourself and tell us what you got.
Okay. I have first, I was drafted into the Australian and the United States Army in the same month. It took place in Sydney, Australia in the September of 1965. I left Australia where I was living and went back to the US to serve. I enlisted because I was called a draft dodger, and I write it as a memoir, part of my personal history in the military.
You don't happen to live in New Mexico, do you?
Pardon me?
Do you live in New Mexico?
No, I live in Kansas.
Ah, okay. We're looking for submissions for a New Mexico anthology, and that would have been a perfect submission. All right. Very good. Anybody else? I don't see, John, can you see anybody else? Or Val? I don't see anybody. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. I got it now. Tracy. Unmute yourself, Tracy.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, I wrote, Grandpa never talked much about the war until I joined the Air Force. 1993, Western Pennsylvania home. For humor and insight of a personal experience, family stories, and entertaining.
All right. Good. You got a plan. All right. Very good. Barb, you want to go next?
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, no, my mic seems to go off and on at will. Okay, so I had a similar experience to, I don't know if anybody's seen the movie The Man from Snowy River, where he gallops over the edge and has a really dangerous, almost this way, all the way down. I was at a fox hunt. It was in Kaiserslautern, Germany in 1975, and I would write it just for people who've had similar experiences, and I would write it because it was important to me.
All right. Very good.
And I survived.
And you survived. All right. Rich, I'm not sure I know who you are, but you RITCHIEBR1. Please go ahead.
Yeah, that's me, Bob. My last name is Richie.
Okay.
I want to write a novel about the Coast Guard's battle with the rum runners during Prohibition.
Oh,
That occurred obviously in the 1920s, and I would be specifically focused on the East Coast, particularly in New England. And the research project that got me going was sinking of a vessel called the John Dwight, which sunk unexpectedly off of Martha's Vineyard, and 11 crew members washed up dead the next day. The several small boats were found adrift, and the captains were never found. So it was obviously some kind of hijacking issue, probably rival rum gangs. And the reason that I wanted to write this story was it's just a part of our history. I find a lot of the things that were going on in the 1920s sort of cycling through in the 2020s. And it was really a difficult task for the Coast Guard, I think, in the 1920s because of the public's response to the Volstead Act and the fact that most folks didn't really care to have any enforcement in prohibition. And so my grandfather, who was in the Coast Guard like I was, much later though, World War II era, worked in the Coast Guard during that time frame and in those waters. And so that's what inspired me to sort of get going in that direction.
very good. When you do your research, don't fail to look up old movies. There actually are a lot of old movies that have got that scenario, and you may find I use it for old airplane stuff. It's amazing what you can see in those old movies. All right, Nancy, I think you're the last one.
I am the last one, but I would write something very funny. I tried out for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire 3 times in New York City about 20 years ago, shortly after I retired from nursing early. And I said if it would be really interesting if I got picked and won, but I didn't get picked and I didn't win. It was fun and it was funny because there was a lot of funny things that happened during that whole experience that made it far better for me had I won $1 million. It was a funny time.
Hey, good job. And we got one more hand that just got snuck in there. Annette, go ahead. You can do it.
Okay, I thought I'd just throw loose in the fray here. Okay, this is my sentence. My ambidextrous uncle copied and coded 2 Bibles at the same time, noting locations of where he might be sent in World War II. All possible locations were coded to chapter headings of the Bible. 1943, he's in South Dakota. He went to the Pacific and he is MIA to this day. And why do I want to write it? Because it's unique, a very unique story, and it's something that the family needs to know, and I think others would find it interesting.
Okay. I think we got everybody gave us their opinions. They gave us some inputs. I don't see any other hands up, so we'll go ahead and move on. But let's just summarize what you all did. You took an idea and you summarized it, and you tried to, include just a few little details like when and where, and you addressed why would people and why would you like to read or write this story. And those are all good places to start. Didn't take you very long, did it? It won't take you very long to get started if you really want to write. So where to get more help if you're really serious about this? Well, first of all, write something. Start out by writing, all right? Take classes. Okay, you've got universities that you probably live near or colleges that offer either real classes or the kind of classes that are called, I can't think of the word right now. Just they're not that you don't get college credit for them, but you take classes and they have there's also classes that are run by an organization that is in most cities called Oasis. Those are available. And then you may have writing groups like we do, a regional writing group, Southwest Writers, and there's writing groups all over the United States, and they sometimes offer classes. You can find classes on the internet. If you just start looking around at some of the websites and Facebook pages where folks are talking about writing, for example, I think it's AutoCrit has started offering classes on a fairly regular basis. Now, some of them are free if you're a member, and some of them may cost you some money. Military Writers, you're taking a class right now, sort of. It's a short one, but it's free, and so take whatever you can and learn from other people, even if you already know the subject. I like to take classes again to see what's new and what it is that I forgot that I knew. Join or form a critique group. It's absolutely it's indispensable that you have to get somebody else to read your stuff, and you need to read it. You need to read it out loud, not just read it on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. You need to say it out loud and hear it. And those things that look perfect on a page, when you hear them in your ears and you go, how the heck could I have written that? You need to subject your writing to rewriting and other people's opinions. Regional writing groups, I covered that. Conferences, there are lots of writing conferences that are all over the United States. You can find them by genre, or you can find them by location, or you can find them just because you want to go on a cruise and there's a bunch of writers that are going to have classes on a cruise. You can do conferences and learn a lot. You can come to Kansas City and join us at the end of September in and there'll be classes that will be held there. This is the most important thing for you, though. Decide on your business model. Are you in it, as the first slide, the first bullet said, to make money? Or are you in it, as that first slide and the last bullet said, because you're writing for yourself and you're writing for therapy, and it doesn't matter if you make any money? It doesn't matter what the answer is, but know what the answer is. If you're in a regional writing group or critique group and you want to have a group of people do an anthology, you're not going to make a lot of money. You may not even make any money. Know that up front. Don't spend any money. Don't spend $25,000 to hire editors and people to help you with a cover for a book that's going to sell 200 copies. Decide on your business model. You want to publish, you can publish for free. Absolutely, you can publish a book using Kindle Direct Publishing and not spend a single dime. The last slide. You can do it. I promise you, you can do it. This is something I clipped out of the Albuquerque Journal. A sixth grader from Tularosa wrote a poem to honor his uncle, who was a combat medic. If that sixth grader can write something and be published, you can too. You got any questions? You want more information? Send me an email. There it is, jimtritton@comcast.net. I'll be very happy to help you as best I can. And at this point, what we'll do is we're going to stop sharing. I'm going to put myself back up here as the speaker. And we will now go and do whatever you want for Q&A. I'll be happy to, you can unmute everybody and we'll just take them as they come or in the chat. Everybody's still muted.
Jim, how long have you been writing?
Since high school.
Wow.
I wrote fake news before it was fashionable. The Gorton High School, the Gorton News, with Judy Salador, we wrote Harvey's Corner, and we made it up. Everything. There wasn't one word of truth in the whole thing, and we had fun. That's the point. We had fun, and we got published, and I got hooked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Val has posted, while you're thinking of questions, Val has posted that the Military Women's Memorial is also a good source of service members' stories. That's a good one.
Nancy's hand is up.
Nancy's hand is up. All right, I can't see it. I have to figure that out. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom. It's a blueprint that I highly recommend. When I first started writing, I wasn't a writer, I was a nurse. I knew who, what, when, where, and what color is the drainage. So I had to learn how to write and capture an audience. And like you said, our local community college used to do community education every once in a while. And they would do little short courses for writers and the business of writing. Writing your book is just the first. And then when you start to sell your book, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to lose your shirt. So you have to learn how to be a business person as well.
Right.
And I took advantage of every free course. If it said free, I signed up. Also, if you subscribe to a magazine called Authors Publish magazine will give you any free webinars that they offer from renowned editors, other writers, people in the business, and it's a good source of information. Just keep learning and growing.
Okay, very good, Nancy. Thank you.
Jim, Annette has raised your hand. I'm just
Yeah,
helping.
I'm having trouble seeing. I can't see anybody raising their hand. So please just tell me, just unmute yourself and ask the question.
I'll just take it to Nancy that Authors Publish is also a newsletter online. So I get it a couple times a week online. It doesn't have to be a print copy, and it is a wonderful source. And I think, John Swainston, you said you're a poet. I'm a poet too. Poets.org, you can do, when you have things to send in, you can do a filter and look for publications where you might want to send your poetry. Poets.org.
Poetry is very difficult to find anybody who will pay you. And secondly, it's hard also to get published, and the anthologies are a very good way to do that. Or your own anthology. One of the guys in my writing group, Mark Fleischer, he puts all of his poems together and publishes a book on his own.
Oh, there are many ways to get out there, and a lot of state organizations have poetry. In Wisconsin, we have a very active and alive Fellowship of Poets. So we're sharing information all the time, and just about every state has one. I know Minnesota does, South Dakota, and my frame of reference is the Midwest, but I'm sure all over you'll find that. Nancy, maybe you know too.
Well, I was just going to say, Poets and Writers magazine has a list every month in the back of the magazine. They have articles about writing and about editing and about where to send your stuff. And they also have a whole list of conferences and magazines that are looking for people with the deadlines. So every month you could check that out. Poets and Writers. I'll write it down in the chat.
Okay. And I see that, Bob, you had a question about what are some good resources for historical writing. Did I get your question correct, Bob?
Yeah, I've played around with the National Archives database a little bit. I've had some success, but then also that thing's massive. I just get lost in there, and I was always looking around to see if there was a tutorial for how to manage getting around the archives or getting through newspaper archives or just general resources for historical writing.
That's a good question. Has anybody else got the answer?
I don't have the answer to that, but I'm going to a virtual conference next month, the beginning of February, for the History Quill is what it's called, and it's like a 3-day virtual conference on historical fiction writing, and they have some just looks like amazing presenters. I mean, there's a cost to it, but since I am new to that genre, except for a short story or two, I thought it was worth the investment before I spent, hundreds and hundreds of hours going down the wrong path. But also, I've started to get pretty involved with Ancestry.com, as I know John Cathcart, he's more of an expert in that. I'm just like a newbie. And there's really a ton of information in there, particularly when some of the military information that you can get records from. So also, the last thing I'll say about this, because you said Coast Guard, 2 years ago in New London at our conference, we had the guy who's like the Coast Guard historian speak at our conference, and he is based there in New London. And if you DM me your email, I'll look up his information afterwards and I'll send you his email, because he really wants people to tell the kinds of stories that you're telling, and I think he'd be probably really helpful, maybe able to help you out.
And John Cathcart posted in the chat for anybody who wants it. There's a resource directory that MWSA maintains, and you can click on that link and see what that can provide you. I'll try to answer the question as best I can with at least a little anecdotal. How did I go about it for a historical fiction piece that I did about some Navy aircraft that I had fly between Norfolk, Virginia, and the UK in July of 1937 in an unpublished novella. I bought a book that talked all about that airplane. That was number one. So I had everything I needed to know about the airplane in that book. Then I just started looking at other sites that talked about that airplane. And then I looked up historically. I knew that in July of 37, I knew people had flown across the Atlantic, but I went and looked up I said, who was the first to fly across? Not Lindbergh, but the polar route. And there were U.S. Army aircraft that were flown in I think anyway, a lot earlier. And I tracked their leg. That's factual. So I could find where they had flown, and then but they were going east to west, and I was going west to east, but it was still the same places. So I used a lot of that. And then after I figured out where they would fly, I then contacted historical societies in each one of those locations. And I said, okay, in July of 1937, if was there an airfield there, that a seaplane base there? And if so, what did it have a name? Did it have a bar? Is there a restaurant nearby? Was there anything that was unique to food that was around that time? For example, I learned when the lobster roll was invented, and I was able to throw that into the story. So I found the historical societies were really very, very helpful. Just track them down. It's on your own. You got to track them down. and ask people questions. The worst they can do is not answer you. I wanted to use my meeting with my wife in she's Danish, and I was going to have my planes land in Greenland, and I wanted to know if I could use my meeting with Yasmin as the basis for what happened in July of 37. And my first question was, did they have Danish blondes in Greenland in July of 1937? And I didn't know the answer. So I sent the consulate an email, and I told them what I was doing. I said, I'm looking to see, did you have Danish women in Greenland in July of 1937? And the obvious choices would have been school teachers or nurses or administrators. And they came back with, it took them a couple of weeks, and they came back. We checked with the boys back in Copenhagen, and the answer is yes. So I was able to then do the scene I wanted to without somebody saying, well, yeah, but they never had women there. No, they did. I verified that. Does that give you some ideas? Maybe. You just got to get creative, Bob. You just got to, do your best, make long distance phone calls, look on the internet, and you'll find people. I even tracked down 2 pilots who flew that airplane. They were both at 100 years old, and asked them questions about, because I wasn't sure about some stuff. Even though I had the book, I wasn't quite sure about certain things, and I got them to answer them and get me factually correct. And I got it down to finally, there was only one thing that was not historically correct that I had to figure out how to handle. And there wasn't enough gas in that airplane to get from Labrador to Greenland or to get from Iceland to the Orkney Islands. So I sat down with a couple of other pilots, and then I went back to these 2 guys and I said, you had a lower wing that had a place to hang depth charges, right? They said, yeah. Could you, not did you, could you have taken a drum, filled it up with fuel, put a hose in it, you had a wobble pump, pumped the gas, the avgas into the pontoon where the main fuel tank was, and therefore extend your range of flight? Both of them said, absolutely, we could have done that. Did you do it? No. But it's not something that was absolutely impossible. So that's another thing to keep if you're going to go the fictional, if you're going to go nonfiction, you got to keep it straight. But if you're going to go fictional, you can make those little adjustments and make sure you had enough gas to get from A to B.
I have to share a remarkable story with you. When I was writing Guiding Missile, which took me many, many years, my father-in-law was a forward observer in World War II and was in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge. And we were trying to trace his steps. And I was at a dead end, and all of a sudden my brother-in-law calls me from Scranton, Pennsylvania, saying, Dad got a letter here. It's a big fat envelope. It's from a guy in St. Louis, Missouri. And I said, open it and tell me, because I was hoping that hoping against hope that he received correspondence from his war buddies. Well, guess what? It was the most fortuitous thing. It was a multi-page letter from his buddy that he served with in his company, who was the company's secretary and kept copious notes on where they were, what battles they were in, who got injured, how many miles they trekked to the next, and then because they zigzagged all over France, Belgium, Germany. And from then on, I found his phone number, called him, and he forwarded all those letters to me, each of them 8 to 10 pages. And I had all that history on which to build my father-in-law's military journey in World War II. It was the best thing ever.
That's good. Yeah. Most of the services have got some kind of historical records and I know the Army's got a center. I can't remember whether it's at Fort Leavenworth or at Carlisle, but where they file all the after action reports. And if you can get access to these things, you can find a lot of stuff. But now that's dealing with the facts. Let's go back to something I talked about earlier. If you're going to write and put yourself a main character that it's not you, you're writing about somebody else. How are you going to put what the feelings were that he or she felt at the time? And my suggestion is figure out what the feeling is you want to portray. Take your feelings when you felt something like that and transfer it over to how that person probably felt at the time. Any other questions? John.
Not really a question, a writing prompt. I was going to mention this when I posted the link to our website's resources. As a writing prompt, if anyone, we mentioned several websites and I wrote them down, but it would be nice, since some of those I've never even heard of, if you go to that link at the bottom, there's a form and you can do a quick writing prompt, which is write down, here's the website, here's the magazine, whatever it is, and say just in a few words that would be of benefit to our members. This is the website that I'm recommending. Here's what it did for me, or just so that's more than just a list of a website. It's your experiences on how you used it as a writing prompt, but actually because it helps people out. The next thing I'm going to do, different subject, is another good thing that we can all do as MWSA members is become reviewers. And I always push that because there's a bunch of us in on this call right now. And if you are a reviewer and haven't learned a lot as a reviewer and increased your skill as a reviewer, please raise your hand. And nobody's going to raise their hand. I think everyone has learned something. I'm preaching to the choir on this one. And but anyway, as a way to learn about and increase your skills as a writer, I would strongly recommend this is a great opportunity. It's like being in a writer's group because you do get to critique somebody else's writing, and that can help but help you out as well. And I put that link there if you'd like to join us if you're not already a reviewer.
I see it. And Martin also put in a note, naval ship reunions. Actually, all military organizations usually have some kind of reunion associated with that unit. And they have newsletters, and they're also usually very, very willing to help people when they're writing stories. John?
Yeah, I don't know if you all know this or not, but if you're writing in a document, Microsoft Dot, there is a function in the review process of that software that will read what you wrote back to you. So you can listen, and I use it all the time for my poetry because I find words that I thought meant something and sometimes don't because I wrote them wrong or misspelled them or whatever. But having the software read back to you after you've written it has really helped me a lot. And it's a very common use thing.
That's good to tell everybody about that. I would urge people to read in public with human beings also, because you get the body language. You know, and it's one thing to hear. It's not just the words. If you're reading to a group and everybody's going, oh, and then you may not see that or hear that, but you can see it. And so when I read at the VA writing group, and Bob Parnell will attest to that, I'm watching to see how is it going over. Are they responding well to it? Are they smiling? Are they cringing? You know, that's all good feedback, and you can't get that straight from the page or just listening to the recording. But that's very good. That's a great technique, John. Yes, thank you. Anybody else? It's been an hour.
I just have one thing to say. One last thing to say, I should say. I know, we've talked about sparking interest in stories and this and that. And so for, anybody who's an MWSA member, I would encourage you to submit a story. If you have a story, a poem, we really would like to have more poetry in our MWSA dispatches. It's our quarterly journal. It's a good chance to get published. And for, whether it's your first time or 100th time, we'd love to share your work with our readers. It's, obviously free submission. So I'll put the link to it in the chat. So please feel free to submit.
If you enjoyed or benefited, I won't say enjoy. If you benefited from this presentation, there'll be 4 more other presentations. These are the same ones that we gave to veterans out in San Diego. There'll be one every other month, and just watch the notices on the Facebook page for MWSA or the website. If you're not a member of MWSA, please consider joining the organization. We don't bite. We actually are trying. I mean, our motto is to help people. We want to help veterans and their family members to tell their stories. And we know you've got stories that are out there. And so, do you want them to go with you when you go, or do you want to leave them behind where other people can maybe benefit from what you have, what you want to write, what you've written? And if that's it,
Jim,
Nancy, yep.
I'll just say, I'm going to be doing the show in March. It's
Yep.
going to be on setting your story and how you can use setting to reveal a character and highlight your theme and really establish the tone in a story or a memoir or whatever it is you're writing. So look forward to seeing you all then.
And you want to listen to Nancy talk. She's actually a highly qualified person to give a talk on writing, having taught at the U.S. Naval Academy and in this subject for many years.
And
All right.
Jim, this is Tracy. I just have a question. These will be recorded and available to us because I missed
This,
the first 15.
John, did we get it recorded?
Oh, you're on.
I can't.
You're on.
I got the
Yes.
thumbs up.
Okay.
We are
All
recording.
right.
Thank you.
And all those people who said that they had something come up that was really important and they really were watching football, they'll be able to watch it too.
Good to see you, Tracy.
You too, Val.
All
I have
right. Thank
another
you all for
Good to see
coming.
everybody.
Nice.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jim.
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
doing it.